So I watched Kodachrome, new movie coming straight to Netflix. Now I'll explain why that's very important later. Simple premise, Jason Sudeikis, he's working for a record company, about to get fired. There's the whole music isn't what it used to be. Artists are just products now. They're not really visionaries. And he gets roped in to this cross-country road trip with his dad, who's played by Ed Harris. Perfect. Bitter old man Ed Harris, in my opinion, that's best Ed Harris. So he gets roped into this cross-country road trip with his dad, who was never around much. He was this photojournalist, and the reason they're going on this road trip is because there's a kind of film, Kodachrome, that's no longer being made, it's obsolete, and there's one place, it's the last place that is still processing these photos, and Ed Harris, the father, wants to get some of his photos processed, so they're going to go on this cross-country trip. And then Elizabeth Olson is Ed Harris's, the dad's nurse, and now I think everyone gives a great performance. I actually liked hers the most because her character, you could criticize it as she's just a perfect character. She's just puts up with everybody, is just so warm and so perfect. And you could say it's an unrealistic characterization, but I think as far as an acting performance, she actually pulls off this perfect character, and I think it's surprisingly hard for an actress to actually pull that off. And what I mean by that is when the character is perfect, but the actor or actress can't help but fall short, it can be a little grating. But here, Elizabeth Olsen, her character's perfect, she's perfect, and honestly, it's just a joy. So anyway, some really interesting issues at play here. One is when you have fathers who are very successful or just artists, how this can create real problems for kids in general, but especially their sons, where I think sometimes the son will internalize certain artistic values, certain values of success that aren't really true to them. So they might spend their whole life trying to be this rock and roll artist like their father, even though that's not something that they're ever really going to succeed at, and they really just need to be their own person. And it's similar to just feeling insecure and jealous of your successful father, but it's a little different. It's more realizing you've internalized certain values about how to live your life from your father, who's a very distinct type of person, that most likely the son isn't that same type of person. And then the really interesting issue of film versus digital, which is very interesting because we're watching a film. So digital media, whether it's photography or movies, is dominant. Now, it's not completely dominant. There's still a lot of movies shot on film, but digital is increasingly used more and more. For what reason? With digital, the physical size of something is microscopic compared to actual film. So as far as just being able to store things, being able to preserve things, being able to edit things in post-production, it's just so much higher with digital. So there's so many of these practical reasons why it's easier and in some sense objectively better to shoot with digital. But there's some people who are diehard purists and fans of film that say digital just has this polish. It almost looks too good. It's almost preserved too well. It has this polished look, whereas film, it actually degrades over time. So each time you watch it, it's going to look a little different. And after many years, you're going to have a really nice lived-in look to the film, versus that you're not going to get a digital movie. It's going to look the same each time you play it. So there's this really interesting debate, and I don't think the movie comes down strongly on one side or the other. I think it gives both sides of the argument. Now, what I didn't really like was some of the additional things that they explained with Ed Harris's character. They seemed contrived, like they just needed to have this happen. So he says, why are they taking the cross-country trip? Well, because he doesn't like flying. For someone who's a photojournalist and he talks about going to all these different parts of the world and covering civil wars in Africa, for him to not like flying, that just seems weird. And it seems to go from any kind of legitimate, love of film to being this weird kind of anti-technology person. Same with why he can't just mail in his photos, because he doesn't like mail. And it's like, well, if you don't like mail and then you also don't like digital, so you don't like email and you don't like people corresponding electronically, how are people going to be communicating? So it transformed him from what I thought was a fair, film purist character to just this weird fringe anti-technology person that I didn't think fit with his characterization. And I do think it's interesting they talk about records, music records, and how it's superior to having songs on your iPod. But again, for someone who loves, and one of the characters is such a traveler, if you're a traveler and you don't really have a set home and you're kind of all over the place, you can't take your records with you. And that's one of the most awesome things about digital media and digital files, is that you can have all these movies, all these music, and you don't have to be chained to one place to enjoy it. You can really travel the world. So, but then I liked how the movie brought up the other point where, yeah, you're gonna with digital photography, you're going to take way more photos, and you're going to be able to take photo after photo after photo, but you're also going to have way less photos that you maybe treasure and way less photos that mean a lot to you. And what you're going to end up with is way more photos, but all this just clutter on your desktop that just you move around and you don't have any of these things you really treasure. And that's the argument against Netflix, where with Netflix, you're going to have so much more content and so much more content in every genre, but are you going to have as many of these era-defining great movies that everyone remembers and talks about for years and years? It's debatable. And there were some great lines of dialogue. I loved how Ed Harris described photography and this desire to create something eternal as human nature made tangible. It was a good line. Then Jason Sudeikis, he's talking to Elizabeth Olson, and he says, guys usually don't change for women during college. And she says, well, when do they change? And he says, usually when it's too late. And just kind of honest, heartfelt moments that I was surprised that the movie really did have. And then Ed Harris, he had this great exchange where he's rationalizing at first why he's miserable. He's saying, oh, great artists are miserable. Look at all the great artists. It's that rage and that narcissism and that ambition that fuels all great art, that hole that can never be filled. Then Jason Sudeikis says, so you're aware that you're a miserable asshole. And Ed Harris is like, well, of course I am. I'm not an idiot. Like, give me some credit. Of course I'm aware of how the other people perceive me as this horrible person. And now I'm going to talk about one thing I didn't like about the film. It gets in a bit of spoiler territory, so if you want to go into it really fresh, don't watch. Otherwise, keep watching. Now, towards the end of the film, I thought there was the high for me of the film, where Jason Sudeikis, he's interviewing this band, and he finally steps up, shows some confidence, really speaks from the heart, and has this great career moment. And then he sticks up for his dad, Ed Harris. And I thought it was just such a great moment, because at that point his dad was such an unrepentant asshole the whole movie, but nonetheless Jason Sudeikis, he could find it to be the bigger person, to accept his dad for all he is and still stick up for him. And I thought it was a great heartfelt moment. But then there were a bunch more of these little sentimental reconciliation, and it was just too many, where I felt like they'd done such a job showing just how horrible, really a horrible person and a bad father, bad husband Ed Harris was. And then they had all these nice redemptive moments where it kind of seemed to be saying, well, look, he's turns out he was a good guy all along. And it was just too much and unnecessary. I thought they really should have ended it with showing, yeah, there's some people who are addicted to their work and are addicted to this, that, or the other thing. And as a result, aren't good husbands, aren't good fathers. But that's okay. That's okay. As a son, you got to some extent, you can be miserable about it your whole life and kind of live in your dad's shadow and let him control your whole life, or you can just find acceptance and find success and happiness by letting go, accepting, and even loving your dad regardless. I didn't think they needed to make it so touchy, heartfelt towards the end. They should have just had Ed Harris be an asshole the whole time. So that was my one complaint with the film. And then last thing I didn't love, honestly, what surprised me was the soundtrack. I thought this movie, it was a perfect kind of movie to have this great music and great song choices. For some reason, I just felt like they're trying a bit too hard and forcing it, and I didn't really respond to some of the song choices. But there was one lyric, we wear the question shirt until the answer hat comes. Now, I've never heard that song, I've never heard that lyric. I thought it was quite good. And Bruce Greenwood, I have to say, he was in this. He's unrecognizable. I didn't even recognize him, but he was good in this. He's been doing great work lately, so I did want to give a shout out to him. I just realized I butchered the quote. It's, we wear the coat of questions till the answer hat is here.